The documents were signed in silence. No cameras. No confessions. Only 2 signatures signaling the end of a decades-old illusion. And in that silence, everything shifted. For years, fans were told it was simple, that Meri and Kody's split was mutual, clean, just paperwork. But what if that was only the surface? What if behind the scenes, this so-called peaceful separation hid the most shocking financial secret in sister wives' history? Because the truth about Meri's real divorce settlement wasn't just emotional, it was financial warfare. And how their empire was split up could redefine all we ever believed we knew about the Browns. And if you think that's outrageous, just wait until you hear what came next. It started as rumors, the sort of whispers that lurk in the shadows of fan sites, behind handles and pixelated photos. There was another wife, one thread read. Before Meri. Before all of them. Most people didn't believe it at first. How could there be a 5th wife when the story we'd all been told started so cleanly, with Kody and Meri, the picture-perfect couple who launched the sister wives' legacy? But that's the thing about secrets, the longer they stay buried, the louder they echo through time. In his early days, long before TLC cameras arrived in Lehi, Utah, Kody Brown was more than a young man with a dream assembling his plural household. He was a man already harboring something he never wanted the world to discover. A name started coming up, Eliza. No surname. No record in the legal records connected to the Brown household. But in a grainy photograph discovered in a discarded family album sold in an auction in Flagstaff, a woman stands next to a young Kody, her hand upon his shoulder, her face soft but haunted. The photograph is undated, but the background, an old polygamist-style house in Wyoming, was contemporaneous with the period prior to Kody ever being on television. That was when questions began to arise. Who was Eliza? Why was she absent from every family history, every biography, every interview? And why, if the rumors were not true, did some of Kody's own family members immediately cease speaking about his childhood altogether? The deeper you go, the more the timeline breaks. In the church documents of the original fundamentalist communities of Lavelle, Wyoming, there is a reference to a short spiritual union between a man who sounds like Kody and a woman named El. The notation is only one word next to the entry, annulled. Not divorced. Not broken. Just wiped out. That one word has become the linchpin of the whole mystery, because what if that annulment wasn't merely religious? What if it was intentional, a deliberate erasure of past events prior to the arrival of the cameras? When TLC producers originally started casting about for a polygamist family to appear on the show in 2009, the Brown family was specifically built. There was Christine, the faithful wife, Janelle, the pragmatic one, and Meri, the struggling first wife. But if there was an Eliza, her existence would have upset that equilibrium. It would have been that Kody's very public love affair, the one that millions of people fell in love with, was never the start. It was a rewrite. One former production crew member, who eventually quit production, recalled a chilling moment from pre-filming interviews. He remembered asking Kody a straightforward question. Was Meri really your first? As this insider recalls, Kody went stiff. His demeanor changed, not anger, but calculation. He brushed it off and said, "First on paper?" "Absolutely." Then he turned to the camera crew and said, "Let's not use that part." That sentence has haunted numerous who've delved deeper into this case. Because if there were another before Meri, it means every emotional milestone, the anniversaries, the vows, even the show's beginnings, were predicated on a foundation of secret betrayal. And still, when fans started making guesses on the web, TLC said nothing. Not a denial. Not an explanation. Silence. And in the reality TV universe, that usually has only one interpretation: there's something they don't want you to know. But Eliza's narrative is not merely a ghost story hovering in the backwaters of the internet. There are remnants, receipts, letters, and bits of testimony that coalesce into something much more sinister than an abandoned marriage. One anonymous note, said to a Sister Wives fan podcast in 2021, purported to be from a former family member. It contained 2 Polaroid photographs and a handwritten message that read, "He swore me faith. He gave me silence." The handwriting was careful, deliberate, and uncannily similar to samples of Eliza's known script discovered in faded church directories. If true, that would mean this wasn't a rumor. It was a real link, deliberately erased. The farther in you go, the sharper the shadows are. Eliza was more than a name forgotten. She could have been the earliest cornerstone of Kody's plural fantasy, the one who paid for ambition when it supersedes devotion. The harder you search, the more the sequence of events is the same: vanishing acts, denials, recreated histories, and strategically timed family statements. And as we venture deeper into this enigma, one haunting question is left behind. If Kody would delete one wife from history, what else has he deleted from reality? The shadow of Eliza isn't disappearing, it's only just forming. Before you keep reading, leave a comment below. Do you think the rumors surrounding a 5th wife were suppressed by TLC? Your thoughts may just reveal the next truth. Stay tuned, because what happens next will make you look at the whole Brown family differently. She materialized like a specter out of a lost chapter, a woman whose name was seldom spoken, but whose presence coursed through every instant thereafter. Eliza. Her whole life was just rumor for years. But what if she was never supposed to vanish? What if the story of Meri's so-called beginning was built over the ashes of another woman's silence? The story of Eliza's unveiling begins quietly, tucked in the margins of old family journals that never made it to public hands. Handwritten scribbles, with ink now somewhat faded due to time, referenced a first covenant, a marriage said to have occurred in the early 1990s, well before the glossy face of sister wives even became a thing. There, in a tiny ceremony conducted within an isolated community in Wyoming, young Kody Brown allegedly entered into what insiders called a trial marriage. Unlike with marriage, this type of spiritual ceremony did not leave a trace, no documents, no safeguard. It was the ideal ghost marriage, the one that would simply disappear without a trace if the man ever decided to go elsewhere. And that's precisely what occurred. Witnesses later testified Eliza was devout but frail, a woman who grew up in a family that taught obedience as the greatest virtue. She was characterized as reserved, the sort of person who prayed more than she talked, who obeyed the rules even when they injured. But between the vows and the polygamist lifestyle, something broke. There were whispers that Kody wanted to expand the family, not with Eliza's consent, but with her replacement. One of the first names that surfaced around that time was Meri Barber. And while Meri's side of the story began with tales of instant connection and spiritual destiny, there was always an unspoken silence about what came before. Fans bought Kody's backstory for years, the handsome tale of man and wife brought together by vision and faith. But when you scratch beneath the surface, things don't quite add up. Meri would say over and over again that she and Kody's marriage happened quickly, as if the choice was guided. Guidance does not take away history, though. If anything, it leaves one with an excruciating question: guided by whom? In ancient neighborhood records, a couple of eyewitness accounts by women who lived in the neighborhood of the Browns mention a woman who disappeared overnight. No reason. No mention of where she might have gone. Only a silent departure, followed by whispers that she had broken her covenant. In those communities, to break a spiritual bond wasn't merely scandal, it was banishment. Years later, when the cameras started rolling for TLC, that gap in Kody's chronology was plugged under the slick finish of a family drama about love, faith, and harmony. But behind the cameras, the truth might have been haunting those who recalled Eliza's name in silence. A family insider recounted an eerie moment at an early family gathering. When Christine used the phrase first wife, a hush fell over the room. Meri looked uncomfortable, said the insider. She smiled, but she looked down. And Kody diverted the conversation almost immediately. That reaction, that split second of discomfort, became one of the earliest tells that something deeper was buried under the surface. And then, the photo surfaced. A Reddit fan account posted a photo that appeared to be from the early 1990s, a young woman standing beside Kody, both smiling awkwardly, her hand lightly on his arm. The caption on the back of the photo was, "Our first blessing." The handwriting was identical to the anonymous letters, elegant, deliberate, and signed with a simple E. If the picture is legitimate, then Eliza wasn't this myth spun on the internet, she actually existed, and her life was erased. But why? Others wonder if her vanishing had more to do with image rather than faith. TLC's initial casting proposal for Sister Wives was built on a pure, romantic story, a man and his 4 wives beginning life anew in the contemporary world. A secret, concealed wife did not fit that image. It did not sell harmony. It sold scandal. And scandal, then, was the last thing TLC desired prior to airing a show on plural marriage. So Eliza's name disappeared, no pictures, no references, no mention. But even when the truth is hidden, it is bound to leave fissures in the surface. It is there in the interviews, the way Kody glances away when he speaks of his beginnings, the way Meri's voice breaks when she speaks of their early years. Something unspoken hangs in the air, a mutual recollection they cannot acknowledge openly. Because if Eliza had lived, nothing is the same. Meri's marriage isn't the beginning, it's an extension. The groundwork of the Brown legacy is no longer a tale of love and faith, but one of erasure and substitution. And if you think that's the end of Eliza's relationship with the family, wait until you see how her absence defined everything that followed. Because sometimes, the strongest presence is the one no one will name. When Eliza's tale was no longer newsworthy, the Brown family's next installment arrived, one with sunny colors and smiling faces, but featuring the dark shadows beneath in quiet stealth. When Sister Wives aired, Kody and Meri already were the face of modern plural love, a pair representing commitment and faith. But behind that public facade, something much more complex interlacement of finances, religion, and broken promises had already started to wrap around itself. To see the true fallout, you must enter the world the cameras never captured, the world where family wealth, emotional obligations, and secret settlements folded silently together. When Meri and Kody officially split, it was framed as peaceful. "We've grown apart," they said, their tone soft, their words rehearsed. But peace rarely leaves behind so many unanswered questions. How were the family's assets divided? What did Meri actually walk away with after years of building the family brand alongside Kody? The explanation starts with one glaring fact: Meri and Kody never signed a standard marriage agreement. Their union began as a spiritual marriage and a legal marriage, but when Robyn arrived in 2014, and Kody formally divorced Meri so that he could legally adopt Robyn's children, that initial paper connection was broken. The cameras captured the tears, the devastation, the symbolism. But they didn't capture the financial nuance lurking behind that autograph. Because within a family that operated multiple houses, joint businesses, and communal funds, severing legal bonds wasn't easy. It wasn't only love that was being shared, it was power, assets, and control. At the center of it all was Coyote Pass, the family's greatest and most contentious asset. A huge parcel in Flagstaff, Arizona, it symbolized the family's fantasy of equality, but on paper, it was far from equal. Official records reveal that all 4 wives owned different portions of the property, but Kody's name was on every deed. Every loan. Every line. When Meri and Kody split, her ownership status was unclear. Some reports indicated that she kept a small share, others indicated a quiet buyout, off-camera. Family insiders later confirmed that Meri got what they characterized as a settlement gesture, not a cash payment, but in real estate and business autonomy. That's where Lizzie's heritage comes into play, Meri's bed and breakfast in Parowan, Utah. Publicly, it was her passion project, her fresh start. But privately, insiders claim it may have been part of the settlement. It wasn't just a dream, one source said. It was her piece of the empire, the one thing she could walk away with that Kody couldn't touch. And yet, all was not as it seemed beneath the surface. Because while Meri seemed to regain her autonomy, financial control over other assets for Kody still rested firm. The family's overall income from sister wives, the cameo gigs, and internet revenue streams still flowed through a few common business entities, all interconnected back to Kody. That setup caused a quiet imbalance, one that Meri allegedly nursed a resentment for years about. She labored for the family name, another source said. But when it was time to split things up, she saw how much she didn't own. In one off-mic moment leaked, Meri said, "I gave everything. And I left with my name." It's a haunting comment that defines the emotional toll that financial separation took. But the more you probe, the more complex the layers. Financial specialists who've examined the case note that in plural families such as the Browns, where legal unions and sacred unions both exist, settlements become near impossible to put in writing. Without definite legal protection, wives such as Meri are left depending on oral agreements and trust, and in Meri's situation, that trust was already broken well before the paperwork finally caught up. And if you believe that this break came tidily, you're mistaken. Because even after Meri's freedom, her name remained attached to family debts contracted at Coyote Pass. To this day, there's no public record indicating she's been completely extricated from that financial matrix. Which leads to a chilling question: did Meri ever really escape the Brown dynasty, or was her freedom only another deception, a settlement masquerading as liberation? You can sense it in her interviews, in how she hesitates before saying, "my own journey." There is pride, yes, but there is also hurt, the type that festers when liberty is bought at the expense of all that you previously held sacred. And just when you believe Meri's tale stops there, another name surfaces. One that had been wiped years before. Because while Meri was moving on from her past, someone from Kody's past could have been moving back into the light. And that person was Eliza. It began as a myth too subtle to see, a fleeting mention on a fan site, a grainy post that read, "She's back." Most bypassed it, thinking it was another reused rumor surrounding the Brown family. And then, the bits began to fall into place, tiny, nearly imperceptible clues that a person who had disappeared decades before was starting to emerge once more. Eliza. Her name hadn't been heard for years. And yet it started re-emerging discreetly, not in headlines, but in hushed tones. Someone with a pseudonym on social media started liking vintage Sister Wives fan accounts, leaving comments with eerily accurate details about Kody's early life in Wyoming. Comments that only one who had been present there could conceivably make. In the beginning, fans wrote it off as an obsessed fan or an inside joke. But when one post contained a never-before-seen photo of the Brown family's first house, a place TLC had never once publicly featured, suspicion turned to alarm. The image metadata went back to a tiny town just outside Lavelle, Wyoming, the same site where the alleged first spiritual marriage had occurred. Suddenly, the silence around Eliza no longer felt like rumor. It felt like a return. Insiders on the production asserted that when the network learned about this revived moniker, silent meetings were convened off-camera. Executives supposedly worried about what would occur should someone who possessed actual facts prior to the cameras starting speak out. After all, Sister Wives wasn't only a television show, it was a brand, a perception of religion and strength. One misplaced fact could destroy it all. And so, it seems from leaked documentation by a crew member who subsequently left TLC, the network conveyed the message: if she contacts anyone, do not engage. But Eliza didn't even have to make contact. Her silence was enough to create chaos. As Meri was finding her way through her new independence, attempting to rebuild, refocus, and reclaim her narrative, the return of Eliza threatened to drag her back again into Kody's shadow. For decades, Meri had assumed she had been the first, the beginning, the one who started it all. The realization that she could have been second, even in spirit, reopened old wounds that she had spent many years shoveling over. Those close to her say that around this time, Meri grew quieter in public but sharper in her tone during interviews. Her statements about trust and truth carried a bitterness that wasn't there before. On one podcast, when asked if she thought Kody had ever kept secrets, Meri gave a small laugh, not of amusement, but disbelief, and said, "You'd be surprised how much never made it on TV." That one sentence sparked every theory regarding what else was kept from the show, not only emotional deceits, but legal and financial secrets as well. Because if Eliza had ever been included in Kody's history, then the legal chronology of Kody's weddings, and possibly even his property, might be put under scrutiny. If she had ever been promised, even nominally, a share, then her return could unravel years' worth of financial arrangements and public assertions. And that chance scared them all. For Kody, it was not merely a question of exposure, it was a question of control. His power, his status as the patriarch, rested on being able to uphold a clear story, one man, 4 wives, one legacy. Eliza's name broke that legacy wide open. In private, murmurs within the family inner circle indicate that Robyn, Kody's legal wife and zealous loyalist, had sounded the warning first. "She's riling up old demons," she is said to have stated. "This could ruin everything." And she wasn't far off. Because once Eliza's history came back around, folks were asking the tough questions all over again, questions of property, legality, and morality. If Kody had already wiped out one marriage for convenience's sake, what else was he willing to rewrite for the sake of his public image? Financial records indicate that during the months that followed the beginning of Eliza's trending name online, several filings and property updates were carried out within the Brown family's collective businesses, subdued, administrative moves that all but suggested panic within. Meri, on the other hand, seemed aloof, sharing quotes regarding peace, power, and retribution. But those familiar with her modus operandi saw it for what it truly was: survival by silence. For when you've lost your voice already, you know how to use your voice without speaking. Then came the most chilling moment of all, a letter, postmarked from Utah, sent anonymously to a journalist who had been covering the sister wives story for years. Inside was a single sentence written in looping script. "He told me we'd be together forever, until forever became fame." The signature read simply, E. And with it, the legend of the forgotten wife ceased being a legend. It was a reckoning. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't have to be yelled, it just has to last long enough to be discovered. And as the murmurs of Eliza grew more vocal, one thing was certain: the Brown Empire wasn't constructed on belief. It was constructed on the silence of the ones who were erased. But the silence was cracking. And if you think that Kody's secrets stop with Eliza, you ain't prepared for what the paper trail has next. The further journalists dug, the more complicated the tale was. The image of the Brown family, contemporary polygamist family living through love and religion, had always rested upon one factor: the facade of togetherness. But togetherness does not hold under the pressure of hidden fact. By the time Eliza's name was back in the news, the financial fissures that had been developing over the years were already splitting wide open. From Coyote Pass to Flagstaff, every piece of land, every business, every shared vision was now a battlefield. And the timing of Eliza's stealthy return couldn't have been worse, for Kody, for TLC, and most definitely for Meri. Because if Eliza's story held even a fragment of truth, then Meri's entire history, the one she had been publicly defending for more than a decade, would suddenly look like someone else's rerun. She wasn't the first wife. She was the first recognized one. That subtle difference changes everything. TLC had always shown Meri as Kody's emotional support system, the woman who stood up for him when nobody else would, who assisted him in establishing the family's foundation. But behind closed doors, she was starting to grapple with a harsher truth: perhaps that foundation had already been broken before she ever stood on it. Legal experts who reviewed the family's property records noticed strange inconsistencies, overlapping ownerships, unregistered transfers, and titles that had quietly changed hands over time. On paper, Meri's exit seemed clean. In reality, she remained financially tethered to a man she was no longer spiritually or emotionally bound to. There's one tidbit that jumps out: a Flagstaff home previously whispered to be owned by Kody and Meri together, subsequently advertised for sale under an LLC linked to Robyn's name. The timing of the move? Weeks following Meri's formal divorce announcement. Coincidence? Perhaps. But when you connect the dots, Eliza reappearing, property changes, the sudden thrust for greater control over family possessions, the pattern emerges. It wasn't merely a breaking marriage. It was an empire reconfiguring itself before the reality caught up. And that reality wasn't merely emotional, it was financial, tactical, even political within the internal pecking order of the Brown family. People close to the Browns indicate that, once Eliza's name surfaced, Kody became paranoid about his legacy. Meetings were convened. Declarations were written. Family members were cautioned against discussing certain matters. But secrets are not inanimate objects. They expand when you attempt to hide them. Sometime during this period, Meri started talking differently, no longer of the Brown family, but of a woman taking back her narrative. In one of her live streams, she spoke softly. Sometimes, walking away isn't about anger. It's about remembering who you were before someone rewrote your life. She spoke gently, but the warning cut like a razor. Because whether or not Meri ever realized Eliza existed prior to the divorce, she definitely knew now that her tale, her struggle, her loss, her so-called freedom, was only a piece of a much larger cover-up. Fans began asking new questions. If Eliza existed, could she be entitled to any part of the Brown family's fortune? Could old promises resurface as legal challenges? Could Meri's settlement, which once seemed like closure, have been a hush payment to keep her aligned with the show's image? Every possibility seemed explosive, especially for a show already crumbling under public scrutiny. As ratings fell and the family broke apart, TLC's silence was deafening. No denial. No statement. Just strategic cutting and selective storytelling, the same methods they had employed for years to maintain the myth of togetherness. But this time, no amount of cutting could remove what was impending. Because when the truth exists in too many hands, the crew, the insiders, the people who witnessed what wasn't meant to be seen, it's only a matter of time before someone decides to share it. And as the silence finally cracked, one thing became irrefutable: the Brown family wasn't merely existing in a spiritual experiment. They were existing within a controlled narrative, one that had at long last started to unravel. Meri, on the other side of said story, possessed something Kody did not: clarity. She had nothing left to lose. And sometimes, that's the most perilous form of freedom. But what is going to happen when the woman who was silenced once gets a word in edgewise? Because as one insider tells People, the last shot, the reality of who actually paid the ultimate price for Kody's ambitions wasn't going to originate from a leaked memo or a secret snapshot. It was going to originate from Meri herself. And when she finally did speak, the empire trembled. There are moments in every tale where the truth doesn't whisper, it screams. And for the Brown family, that scream arrived in the form of a manila folder left forgotten within an old Las Vegas storage unit. It was Christine who first alluded to it in a low-key fan Q&A years later, how, during the early Vegas days, a production assistant had informed her something odd had occurred behind the scenes. That a folder marked private, do not film, was taken off the producer's table the instant Kody came on set. Inside that folder, according to those who later spoke about it off-camera, were fragments of a life that didn't fit the official narrative. A blurred photo of Kody with a woman no one recognized. A handwritten note addressed to my eternal partner. And the most haunting of all, a copy of a marriage certificate that listed no witness names, no officiant, and a date that predated Meri's wedding by nearly a year. It was the unknown piece that nobody ever knew. And when those rumors found Christine, she wasn't anger, she was silent, palpable anguish. Because in that one moment, all timelines she'd ever held on to, all bargains founded on mutual belief, started to blur. But why would TLC bury something like this? Some assert that it was narrative control. Others assert that it was protection, protecting Kody, protecting the image of unity, protecting the illusion that the show was ever about equality. Whatever the reason, that folder became the forbidden symbol of everything the cameras never showed. And if you find that startling, just wait until you hear what went down when a member of the crew chose to post a single picture from that folder online. The post was short-lived, removed within minutes, but the harm was done. Fans screenshotted it, analyzed it, and enlarged every inch. The blurry female figure to Kody's side didn't resemble any of his recognized wives. Her hand on his arm felt too intimate, too familiar. The internet was awash in speculation. Was this the enigmatic Eliza? The alleged forgotten vow? For a time, all was quiet. No denial. No confirmation. Only Kody's unusual silence on camera, the type that isn't afforded by editing, it's afforded by knowing the truth may actually be slipping by. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere grew unbearable. The family's once holy bond became something colder, more calculated. Janelle attempted to keep the peace, Christine started emotionally distancing herself, and Meri, she witnessed it all happening like someone revisiting an old heartbreak she'd buried years ago. Late one evening, after wrapping on the shoot, one of the sound engineers claimed to overhear Kody on the telephone. His tone hushed, shaking a little, as he mutters, "It wasn't supposed to come out." Not like this. No one ever verified who was on the other end of that phone. But it shifted the tone on set forever. Crew members began to whisper that the show wasn't filming the Browns anymore, it was covering for them. And right in the middle of it, Robyn remained steadfast. To some, her serenity appeared as loyalty. To others, it appeared as awareness. Then the most disturbing part, an anonymous producer's confession that they had other documents under seal by legal order. Documents, they claimed, that contained evidence of a ceremony, evidence of an agreement, evidence of a vow that was never meant to ever see the light of day. It was then that it all clicked into place, the hidden wife, the emotional space, the silence that stretched over every family get-together. And in that quiet, everything was different. Because once you see the truth could always have been cut out, you begin wondering what was ever true. But we've heard only one side of the tale. The side that aired. The side Kody dictated. The side TLC molded into a sellable fantasy. The question here is, what if Eliza wasn't a rumor, but a reality? What if she was the lost start of the whole Brown dynasty, cut out before the first episode even premiered? And if that's the case, what else did they wipe away? It took years after the cameras had faded and the interviews were done, before Christine realized she could no longer keep quiet. She wasn't bitter, at least, not the way people wanted her to be. What she had inside was worse than anger. It was the burden of truth, the kind that won't blow, but quietly devours your soul. She'd smiled through so many seasons, nodded in interviews as her heart quietly asked questions she wasn't ever permitted to ask. But then there was that one live interview, the interview that would alter all. It wasn't staged. It wasn't scripted. It was real. Christine was seated in the harsh studio lights, her gaze more mellow, her voice firmer than ever before. And when asked by the host if she felt that all aspects of Kody's tale had been truthful, she hesitated. The silence was interminable. Then, and only with a quivering breath, she spoke softly, "Not everything we lived made it onto TV. And not everyone who was part of our story was ever shown." The net cracked within hours. Fans quoted that line, slowed it down, replayed it. Some interpreted her as referring to production cuts, some to a secret life. But the deeper her words got, the clearer it became, Christine wasn't hinting, she was confirming. It was the day that the discussion regarding Eliza, the forgotten wife, came back louder than ever. Overnight, every little thing from the vintage footage seemed fishy. Every jarring edit, every moment when Kody appeared distracted or evasive, was taken as proof. The fan forums went crazy with theories, timelines, and screenshots, as if the whole internet had become a detective agency. But for Christine, that moment wasn't about drama. It was about freedom. Because the truth is, she'd known for years. She had seen the hidden hurt in Meri's eyes, the confusion in Janelle's quiet glances, and the unspoken fear behind Robyn's controlled composure. She had lived through the cracks of a story that looked perfect from the outside but was breaking from within. And if you find that appalling, the voiceover could continue, Wait until you hear what Christine discovered in Kody's vintage Bible. It was hidden between the tattered pages of a verse about enduring commitment, a crumpled, aged letter that stated, "For my vow remains across time. One day they'll comprehend." No date. No surname. Only that one letter, E. Christine wouldn't tell how she discovered it. She wouldn't tell when. But subsequently, sources close to her confirmed that she'd had it for years, not knowing if she should disclose it. Because disclosing it would have shredded the very system of beliefs that they'd constructed their whole world on. When she finally left the family, she wasn't leaving Kody alone, she was leaving behind the shadow of all those lies ever sanctified by silence. And in her last exchange before she left, she was quoted as saying to one of the crew members, "You can't edit out ghosts. They stay, even when you stop filming." That phrase became iconic with fans, haunting, poetic, and achingly true. Because deep down, everyone knew this wasn't about Eliza. It was about how far people will stretch to save a myth. How far they'll bury the truth in order to keep an image intact. Kody's response publicly to Christine's words was instantaneous, defensive, dismissive, scripted. But his eyes, they spoke otherwise. That flash of panic, that moment of loss of control, betrayed something more brittle than anger, guilt. Behind him, the empire was shuddering. TLC's public relations team scrambled, press releases were written, and sources murmured that a certain archive might finally emerge if the tale continued to spread. But what Christine wasn't anticipating was the degree to which her private confession would empower others. Fans started unearthing old clips, piecing together pieces of evidence, hunting for clues of the secret fifth chapter of Kody's history. And above it all, Christine remained serene, near tranquil. Because for the first time ever, she wasn't playing at being someone else. She was finally unencumbered. Even so, one question clung in the air: if Christine knew, who else did? And maybe even more chillingly, what did Eliza herself endure once the cameras had stopped rolling? When Christine's bombshell went out to the airwaves, the Brown family crumbled in silence. For years, they'd mastered reacting to scandal with scripted smiles, prepared statements, and optimism tinged with faith. But today, something was different. This wasn't a rumor fabricated by the tabloids, it was truth seeping through the cracks of a well-constructed facade. Meri, once a constant defender of Kody through every public embarrassment, observed the fallout in a peculiar quietness. She didn't release cryptic quotes this time. She didn't deny or defend. She just retreated. Her friends painted a picture of her as quiet, detached, and oddly relieved. It was like Christine had finally uttered out loud what Meri had been whispering to herself in the dark of the night for decades, that there were things about Kody she could never explain, things that led her to question every promise ever uttered in that family. But the genuine tremor was within the fan base. They started linking things together: financial papers, land registration records, public disclosures, anything that would vindicate the facts regarding Kody's clandestine business dealings. The same fans who had applauded family togetherness were now forensic detectives of deception. With every revelation, a cryptic transaction, an unexplained payment, a land title, they were painting a grimmer picture of the man who espoused spiritual leadership. And that's when the rumors about Meri's real divorce settlement resurfaced, this time, with details too specific to ignore. Some claimed she didn't walk away empty-handed. That a quiet payout, far less than she deserved, had been buried in a private arrangement long before TLC ever confirmed their split. Others rumor-mongered that Kody utilized shared funds, masked by the family LLC, in order to take out a loan from which only he reaped profit. The math didn't work, but the feelings did. Betrayal does not always appear on paper; at times, it resides in the quiet of a woman who finally ceases to explain her past. And yet, as the internet ripped apart all transactions, Meri didn't resist. She was exhausted. Exhausted from attempting to explain a life lived before cameras but not really comprehended. Her attention turned inward, to her bed and breakfast, to her independence, to relearning what it meant to live without expecting permission. There were no public confessions, no public feuds. Just a quiet determination. A woman beginning anew after discovering she had been spiritually and legally bound to a man who'd already left her many years before the ink was dry on the papers. But in Kody's universe, silence wasn't peace, it was danger. Because every time Meri wouldn't defend him, every time Christine spoke her truth, his hold on the family's legacy loosened further. His formerly commanding tone now sounded defensive, almost desperate. TLC insiders reported that producers were rethinking narrative control, afraid too much truth would kill the mystique that kept the show on life support. And if you thought that was the worst of it, wait until you hear what came out when TLC's own internal emails were leaked. Included were notes regarding off-record footage, unaired confessionals, and one chilling subject line, Eliza segment, do not include. Suddenly, the dots weren't just connected, they were glowing. Fans realized this wasn't conspiracy, it was omission. Christine's soft words, Meri's silence, and the network's secret edits all led to the same uncomfortable truth: this family lived a double life. The one we observed, and the one they buried. And in that truth, everything started crumbling. The Brown family's public persona, once depicted as complicated but affectionate, began to resemble a brand based on manipulation, omission, and partial truths. What started as a love and unity-themed series had evolved into a live-minute analysis of emotional manipulation and financial dishonesty. In the subsequent final episodes, audiences claimed they could sense the tension. The smiles no longer reached their eyes. The laughter became contrived. Each word Kody uttered echoed as a performance to maintain what was left of his reputation. But the truth, the one Christine, Meri, and even Robyn couldn't keep any longer, was already in the public eye. It wasn't a single bombshell that destroyed them, it was the buildup of years of subtle dishonesty. And as those credits rolled on that season, viewers didn't wonder, will they ever get together again, anymore? They wondered something much more eerie. If this was what it took to make it onto television, what else did TLC whitewash from history? When the hurricane of scandals hit its apex, it wasn't one headline that brought down the sister wives' empire, it was the quiet that followed. No announcements. No posts. No smiley face family photos to silence the scandal. Just nothing. For the first time in more than a decade, the Browns went totally mum. Behind closed doors, production sources later hinted, pandemonium had set in. TLC executives held emergency meetings, debating whether to abandon the coming season or save it by means of damage control storytelling. The objective was straightforward: save the brand, even if this meant rewriting history once again. But truth, like an obstinate echo, could no longer be erased. Christine's honesty had opened the floodgates, but Meri's quiet withdrawal, that was what truly shifted the balance. Fans who once doubted her strength began to see her differently. She wasn't the heartbroken wife anymore, she was the woman who knew how deep the manipulation ran and simply chose to step away rather than scream. And yet, amidst all that quietness, Kody would not relinquish control. He started his own sort of campaign, undercurrent interviews, carefully phrased justifications, changing narratives, blaming outside forces, and distorted gossip. He spoke of loyalty, of betrayal, of misunderstanding. But the tone was not conviction, it was panic covered up by arrogance. Because for the first time, Kody Brown wasn't narrating his own life, the women were. Christine got her voice. Meri got her autonomy. Even Janelle, who'd always been the subdued counterweight to the hurricane, started dropping suggestions that there was stuff fans didn't know yet. And those suggestions, little, careless asides in lives or Q&As, were more credible than any public statement TLC could make. The fans didn't crave spin. They craved truth. And once truth gains air, it never returns underground. And then came the leak. Not from TLC. Not from a reporter. But from an alleged former assistant within the family's legal team. One PDF shared across Reddit and fan communities, titled Financial Separation Overview, Meri Brown. its authenticity was debated instantly. But the details inside, they were too specific to ignore. It suggested that Meri's share from the family estate was calculated not by equality, but by loyalty. Her portion, the document read, had been adjusted to reflect withdrawn participation and non-cooperation with joint ventures. Translation? Because she left emotionally before she left legally, she was worth less on paper. The numbers painted a brutal picture. While Kody retained control of multiple assets tied to family businesses, Meri's payout seemed designed to look fair publicly but fall short privately. One section even noted that shared intellectual property, meaning their brand name and image rights, would remain under Kody's management. If true, that meant Meri not only lost her marriage, she lost ownership of her own story. And on the fringes of the internet, fans started coming up with a new slogan, the price of silence. Because perhaps that was what all of this had finally reduced to, how much a person's truth cost when they'd lived someone else's version of it for decades. The emotional toll began to show. Kody looked older, tense, defensive in every clip that followed. Christine glowed with a kind of freedom that no lighting could fake. Meri? She looked at peace, and that peace, ironically, became the most powerful statement of all. Still, one question lingered like a shadow over everything. If this was how Meri's settlement unfolded, what about the rest of the family's assets? Speculation arose that Christine's fresh beginning wasn't merely emotional, that she had acquired some rights to Coyote Pass well prior to anyone understanding it. Some even went so far as to say that Robyn's house was used in a stealth refinancing deal orchestrated by Kody himself. The truth was knotted, buried under trails of contracts and NDAs. But what everyone saw, what no one could dispute, was that the empire constructed on cohesion had finally revolted against itself. And yet, something more incendiary was brewing beneath the surface. Because deep in the vaults of TLC's archives, those sealed servers that had weathered 10 years of revisions, there remained one clip no one had ever laid eyes on. The piece called Meri's Final Conversation. And by one insider's account, that's where all the things we had thought we knew about their narrative go sideways. It wasn't supposed to be seen. Interred in a hard drive labeled Cut Segment, Season 17, it was to be wiped months before the public ever laid eyes on a frame. But someone, perhaps an editor, perhaps a producer with integrity, preserved it. Quietly. Carefully. The video started just like any other confessional, dimmed lights, that same TLC set, Meri seated with her usual serene face. But something was different this time around. No makeup retouching. No scripted words. Just unadulterated stillness. You heard her breathing, the way a person breathes when they have come to terms with what is going to be said. She faced the camera directly, tired eyes but firm, and whispered slowly. You know, folks believe divorce is all about money or documents. But for me, it was about truth. And the truth is, I was never really free, even when I thought I was. The producer's voice, barely audible, asked if she'd like to continue. Meri hesitated, her hands tightening on the arm of her chair. Then, after a moment, she whispered something that halted even the crew. There were commitments made, ones I never signed for, but I still paid the price. For a moment, she stared off camera, maybe at a producer, maybe at a memory. Then she reached into her folder, pulling out a single document. The camera zoomed, just slightly. Viewers would have recognized the letterhead instantly, the family's joint business entity. But what caught the attention of those who later reviewed the clip was the signature at the bottom. Not Meri's. Not Kody's. Someone else's. 2 initials. EB. Her voice was shaking when she spoke again. They used to tell her she did not exist. But if she did not, then why was she included here? The room was quiet. A camera operator allegedly dropped his lens, not sure if they were still supposed to be rolling. That was the video TLC never showed, the one statement that could have made all the difference. It didn't directly confirm the fifth wife, but it linked every theory, every rumor, every secret agreement. Because now fans had evidence that Meri herself had witnessed proof of being spun into the family's financial tapestry. And if that was the case, it meant that Eliza wasn't just a name spoken in hushed tones, she existed enough to sign her name. Existed enough to be eliminated. When Meri had finished talking, she didn't weep. She didn't beg. She simply stated, "I don't need to expose anyone. I just want my peace." And then she got up and walked off set. No outro. No music. Just the fade of her footsteps as the crew sat stock-still. That moment, that silent departure, was reported to be the last time Meri appeared on camera for the show. Later, the footage would circulate privately among select TLC staff. Some claimed it was emotionally devastating, others called it career-ending if released. But one assistant who viewed it said something that summed it up perfectly. It wasn't scandal that scared them, it was truth. Truth ruins good television. When the news of the leak swept through fan groups, all hell broke loose again. Overnight hashtags trended, #MeriKnew, #HiddenWife, #TLC exposed. And still, amidst all the outcry, Meri kept quiet. She didn't have to. What she said or didn't say spoke louder than anything. Meanwhile, Kody's answers became unsteady, interviews in which his demeanor shifted between indignation and despondency, as if he was trying to run from his own shadow. He labeled it nonsense, fan fiction, and slanderous editing. But the public had seen enough patterns to recognize denial was his final defense. Christine, when questioned about it months later, neither denied nor confirmed. She merely stated, Meri finally found her voice. And that's something none of US could take from her. And that, in a weird, poetic sense, was the conclusion nobody expected. Because this wasn't merely the divorce story. It wasn't a tale of money, possessions, or even infidelity. It was a matter of truth reasserting itself in a world based on domination. It was a story about a woman who, after years of being edited, really picked her own last cut. And perhaps that's the actual secret TLC couldn't keep. That Meri didn't divorce Kody. She divorced the fantasy. And as the lights fade on that final, unseen scene, we're left wondering. If Meri's truth was buried this deep, what other stories never made it to air? Months passed. The headlines slowed, the frenzy faded, and for the first time in years, there was peace. Not the kind sold on camera or written in press releases, but real, fragile, earned peace. Meri had slipped into a new pace of life. Her mornings did not start with calls from producers or requests for one more confessional. Rather, they started with the chirping of birds outside her window, the aroma of coffee in her bed and breakfast, and the gradual re-emergence of her own laughter, unfiltered, unedited, hers. Those days of tiptoeing, of speculating whether every phrase would be turned around and used against her in a narrative were long gone. The world had finally witnessed enough of her suffering. Now, they were witnessing her healing. And it wasn't glamorous. It wasn't flashy. It was quiet, a happiness constructed from the little things that never make television, repainting her front porch, having over guests who didn't know her from celebrity status, smiling for no apparent reason at all. Christine would visit sometimes. The two women, once divided by loyalty and survival, now shared something deeper, understanding. They didn't need to talk about the past, it was written in the spaces between their words. One afternoon, while walking through Meri's garden, Christine looked at her and said softly, "You look free." Meri smiled, that same soft, exhausted smile that once concealed years of suffering, but this time, it was genuine. "I finally am." And perhaps that's the way that every story such as this must end, not in revenge, or revelation, but in women gathering the strength to begin anew. Because when the TV crews went home, when the deals expired and the tabloids moved on, what remained wasn't salaciousness, it was survival. Kody's empire, which once loomed over reality television, began to contract into its own shadow. People could see it now, the cracks, the grunge of years of playing a rendition of love that no longer existed. The show would continue, but the illusion was shattered. People had peeked behind the curtain, and once truth in the light, never returns to darkness. But Meri no longer cared about ratings. Her narrative wasn't about a TV show, it was about a discovery of what love was like when it hadn't been gained through sacrifices. She started new endeavors, hosted retreats, wrote unobtrusively about her experience. Fans didn't see drama, they saw growth. They saw strength. And somewhere, amidst those silent sunrises and solitary walks, she started to forgive. Not for him, not for the cameras, but for herself. Forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was releasing the burden she'd carried long after the world had moved on. In the few interviews she did do, she did not speak of Kody, or the money, or even the fabled settlement. She spoke of the future, of women reclaiming their voices, of living truthfully, of freedom. And in her last interview, the one that really brought this chapter to a close, Meri spoke right into the camera and said, "I thought my story ended when I left him. But perhaps, it began the moment I stopped trying to prove that I was enough." The world did not need to witness her tears anymore, they needed to witness her rise. So the final picture, the one that her followers still see, isn't a picture of heartbreak or scandal. It's Meri on her porch at sunset, wind in her hair, light streaming across her face. No cameras. No scripts. Just a woman who found her way home, not to a house, but to herself. Because sometimes, the strongest conclusion isn't explosive, it's peaceful. And that's where the tale of Meri Brown, the woman once defined by polygamy, heartbreak, and control, really finishes. In light. In strength. In freedom. And as the screen goes black, a final voice whispers, "Maybe we all deserve a second story, one we write for ourselves."